Hey, welcome to week two. This is lecture five, and hopefully this one won't take as long as the other ones have. Maybe, but we'll see. We'll see how this one goes. So we've talked throughout this week about the missional church, right? What does it mean to live out this missional ecclesia, right? These called out ones who have been sent by God into the world for the sake of the kingdom. We talked about the seductive allure of establishment and how Christendom became a bind on the missional imagination of the church in a number of different ways, and really bound us to what I call the centripetal model of Christianity, even within the form of the attractional model. We talked about the need for a paradigm shift in which we move to a centrifugal model where the church is then flung out into the world for the sake of the kingdom, impacting and intersecting people's lives where they are instead of just waiting them to get to where we are. And so it's a re-envisioning of what the church's role is in the world. Now, as we make this shift, I wanted to point to one more thing within the context of these lectures, and that is how we typically divide ourselves up within the church and even in our understandings of what mission is. And now we live in a hostile and divided culture as it is. So we're always dividing ourselves up and trying to determine what tribal camp we most find ourselves at home in. And so that could be politically, economically, racially, ethnically, whatever you want to suggest, nationally. But I think it also happens within the church. And each one of the spheres, as you look at your diagram on this lecture series, I think has an idea of what mission is. So in the first circle, I think we're going to have what we'll call the conservative evangelical movement. These are the folks who are passionate about evangelism as the mission of God. This idea of getting people from here to heaven, right? Getting them saved, making a decision, being born again. Their idea of mission is often evangelical crusades or events or attractional events in which people will hear the gospel and have to make a decision for Jesus. We emphasize the making a decision, the praying the prayer, the inviting Jesus into our heart. That becomes the mark of what mission really is, the number of people we can get saved, right? Oftentimes, that is also associated with certain political movements, certain expressions of what the church should look like, where it is, and the kinds of church that is acceptable. Oftentimes, there's a much more conservative social bent to it. But so that's one of the camps in which mission is understood as primarily evangelism. The second camp that I want to suggest is the liberal progressive social justice movement, and this one was going to focus on the current contemporary cultural ills that affect our society, things like equality and discrimination, things like justice, and I'm not talking about retributive justice. I'm talking about distributive or restorative justice. We might think in terms of gender equality or LGBTQ concerns. We want to think in terms of those cultural issues that seem to keep people bound in oppressive structures. And so the church exists to bear witness to God's liberating capacity in this world, setting them free from those structures and systems that keep them bound, where they're free to be truly and genuinely who they are, free of some of the patriarchy, the misogyny, the phobias, whether it be xenophobia or homophobia, and the church exists for that purpose. And so it becomes very missionally minded in terms of justice movements, okay? And their mantra might be share the gospel, always use words if necessary. This idea that it's best lived out in how we live because the kingdom is on earth as it is in heaven. We're not trying to get people necessarily from here to heaven, but to restore a sense of the goodness and the heavenliness here on earth as people experience a freedom and liberation. The third one is what I'm going to call the high church sacramentalists. These are the folks that believe that we sort of exist to bear witness in the alternative consciousness of our worship before God. And so the church is a worshiping body that gathers before communion, shaped by the church calendar. And their mission is just to live out and bear faithful witness, not necessarily to evangelize or to right all the wrongs in society, but to bear witness in how we live, how we worship, how we pray. Because it is ultimately our call, our clarion call, to give God glory and to make Him known through our lives in this world. And the fourth group I'm going to call the church growth pragmatists. These are the folks that, born out of the attractional movement, believe that the mission of God is best seen through the growing of churches, and we can do that through system structures, through intentional marketing campaigns. They're going to be closely associated with conservative evangelicals, but not always. They also roll over a little bit into the progressive social justice, because they'll be concerned about justice, but justice is a means to an end rather than an end in of itself, because people are concerned about justice, so we'll be concerned about justice so that we can grow the church, and in growing that church, we believe that people will be saved and discipled, and they'll become faithful followers of Jesus. So we develop structures and systems in accordance with that. And really, it's really about creating organizational dynamics that pipeline people through growth, development, leadership, and ultimately service. Within that context, mission is going to be seen in programs. It's going to be seen in big events. It's going to be seen in the kind of worship that they do. And the cool factor, really, I think at some level, we just have to acknowledge that and name it. Now, here's the deal. Here's what I want to finish with for this particular lecture series, is that what if in each of these camps we see elements of the mission of God? And what if missional theology sort of exists right at the center of the collision of all four of these as they come together? And missional theology is right there. What if missional theology is deeply concerned about unjust systems in this world, because we realize that people's lives are bound to structures and systems that keep them from experiencing the fullness and the wholeness of who God has created them to be? But we also believe that we can invite people into an affirming decision about their role in following Jesus, to be baptized and become a faithful disciple of Jesus Christ, as we recognize that we in our worship are being formed and fashioned to be a certain kind of way in a post-Christian context. How we worship and the ways in which we gather together matters. Liturgy matters. The formative nature of calendar matters. Our participation in the practices of the church matter because they form us. And the church is no longer simply our evangelical, when I say this, our Sunday morning worship experience isn't necessarily our evangelical arm where we're trying to just get people in so we can get them saved, but the Sunday morning worship experience becomes an experience for believers whose lives are shaped and formed so that they can bear faithful witness in the world and the rest of the week, so that they can engage people where they are, so that bearing witness to both justice and the call and the invitation to God, people's lives can be changed. And then ultimately realize as they arrive or as we gather, we need structures and systems that will help move people through process of development and growth, and give them opportunity to be exposed to opportunities to grow in their leadership capacity, in their ministry capacity, in their gifts and graces God has placed before them. What if all of a sudden, instead of living in these camps where we're neatly divided amongst one another, what if instead, in this time, in this moment, at this place, missional theology says all of it matters. It all matters in a very different way. And it's not neatly divided up into camps where we can lay claim to certain political arms or debates, but that the kingdom way is this alternative way that breeds this alternative consciousness, where as we invite those who are being restored into the fullness and wholeness of who they are through making justice and peace in this world, as they're being formed through the practices of the church and shaped and given opportunities to grow and be molded into the kind of people that God has called them to be, and using their gifts and their graces and their leadership skills, that together, all of that collectively is living out the mission of God in this world. And so that's my thoughts. I think it serves to bring us all together instead of continually dividing us apart. So those are some thoughts for you. That's week 2, lecture 5. We'll dialogue from this point on. Hopefully this is giving you some food for thought and some opportunities to ask some questions in your lecture responses.